curve and just kind of all in at 28. So recently I changed the carburetor jet size on this 351 Windsor, and I was thinking maybe I should probably readjust the timing curve just to optimize the situation here. Real quick, I just wanted to go over some of the tools that you probably don't have in your toolbox if you're kind of new to working on cars. One of them is a vacuum hand pump. Now you can use this in a lot of older brake systems and even newer brake systems to bleed your brake lines solo instead of having somebody pump the brakes, but I primarily use it as a vacuum test pump. Now the reason I think you should use this instead of just revving the engine is because this way I can isolate just the Vaccume Advance and not have to rev the engine and worry about the mechanical advance. That way I can tune them both separately. Now you could do without this. This just makes things a lot more precise and a lot easier. One thing I will recommend actually is this specific one is from Harbor Freight. It's a Maddox. I really like this one. I haven't had any issues with it. One thing to note is this collar here is vacuum and positive pressure. So don't put it on the positive pressure wondering why it's not advancing at all. I've done that before. So just a heads up there. Second thing you'll need is a timing light. Any old timing light will do. This is just a cheapo one from Harbor Freight. One thing I will mention is make sure the dial is on 0 if that's what you're doing, and just pay attention to where this dial is before you make your reading and make an adjustment based off of the wrong thing. I'll explain how to use it in the video. And then this clamp here is a little bit finicky. You want to make sure it's not touching any other spark plugs or near any other spark plugs, and you want to make sure that this is on top, resting on top of the wire, kind of like that kind of deal, and not this way, because I believe the mechanism that reads it, this little magnet, needs to be resting on it, and that gravity seems to help it a lot. It gives you much more consistent readings. Sometimes the timing will jump around a bunch and you won't be getting a consistent reading. That's usually because something's up with the setup here. Other than that, you just need a basic set of hand tools and you should be able to do this just fine. On this Ford, it's a 1/2-inch distributor clamp bolt. So real quick, I'm going to show you how to use one of these guys. Basically, you have 3 connections that you need to make. Positive and negative on your battery. Make sure you don't mix those up. And then you got to find your #1 spark plug. So in the case of a 351 Windsor, which is the engine here, I believe the 302 and the 5.0, that's the same engine by the way, are the same as far as spark plug layout and everything. But your #1 cylinder is the closest, if you're facing the engine from the front of the car, it's the closest cylinder to you on the passenger side. So that's cylinder #1, and you just follow that spark plug lead, typically to the distributor. That's the easiest place to do it. And then in this case, I like to find a little bit of space because, like I said, this thing's kind of finicky. So I found the best way to get accurate readings is to have the C portion on top and the clamping portion that slides underneath it. That way this kind of gravity sort of assists this, because I believe the thing that's reading the signal is in the C portion. And I kind of have this wire tucked out of the way. This is a vacuum line, not a plug wire. So that way this thing is not going to pick up a signal from any of these other spark plugs. And this wire trailing I kind of have resting up here. That way, again, it's not going to pick up signal, hopefully, because you see that big piece of plastic is going to insulate it from most of those wires. So this is the ideal setup here with this. It's going to give you a more accurate signal. It's not going to jump around as much. Now, in my case on a van, the best viewing point is to kind of come towards the battery side and look down here. What you're looking for is this little funky shaped thing that in my case is super greasy and dirty. And thankfully you can see some timing marks on there. That's those little slits. Now, I went ahead and ground those out a little bit thicker just because I'm silly, and that's not a good idea to do because I could potentially throw off your balance. Now, I didn't cut really much out of there. I haven't noticed much of a difference. The engine isn't running rougher or anything, but still a bad idea. The stock mark should be good enough, and if you have to, you can get some timing tape. If I were to do this again, I would have done it with a fine tip paint marker instead of grinding. Now again, this isn't a van. You might have more space in a pickup truck, but the distributor is right here and your distributor clamp is right there at the base. And if you have a 351 Windsor or a 302, it's probably going to be a 1/2-inch bolt. So I'm gonna go ahead and loosen that and not remove it all the way. I'm gonna keep a little bit of tension, but just enough to where I can rotate that distributor in and out. And then I'm gonna go ahead and start the engine. Now, super important, make sure none of these wires are gonna get caught up by the alternator or the belt or anything else in here. So here I am back at the viewing point I mentioned earlier, and make sure to have your dial set to 0. I'm gonna go ahead and pull the trigger with this pointed at that timing mark. And as you can see,
I don't know how well you can see that. The shutter might be off, but basically it's flashing in response to those marks. Again, don't know how well you can see that, but every time it flashes, that little line is corresponding with the mark, and in this case it looks like 10 degrees. That little white blotch you're seeing underneath there is the 0 mark, and you can see it's kind of shining right on that line, so I know I'm at 10 degrees base with no mechanical or Vaccume Advance. I don't know how well you can see that, but I'm pointing the light right at the harmonic balancer, and I'm just gonna rotate that. I'm gonna move my dial to match where 0's at. That looks like 15 degrees. I'm gonna back it off a little bit. And this kind of depends on which marks are the clearest for you, but another way you can use these dial backs at least is you can crank it to the timing you want and then rotate the distributor until it's flashing on the 0, and that way it'll just be a little easier than rotating it and checking if some of the marks aren't as visible as others. Next, we're going to go ahead and set up the Vaccume Advance, which is where this guy comes in. Now, this one's where you kind of got to be careful because you're going to be real close to a belt if your engine's set up the way mine is, so just keep your hands clear of a belt, pay attention to where your fingers are at. This thing here is called a vacuum canister, and inside this little hole is an Allen wrench. Now, this hooks up to your vacuum line that can either go to your manifold or the port on the side of your carburetor. I'm running the port on the side of my carburetor. I'm going to hook the hand pump to the vacuum fitting on the distributor. Keep that out of the way. Then I'm going to turn it on with the timing light. And what I'm going to do, and I'm just going to explain this now while it's quiet because the engine might be real loud. What I'm going to do is I'm going to squeeze this to where it has a certain amount of vacuum and see when I start to see the advance with the vacuum, and then I'm going to keep going until I stop seeing advance with the vacuum, and that's going to give me an idea of where the timing curve is, and then I'm going to mark where the timing's at the beginning and at the end. Well, I already know where it's at the beginning, it's at like 12, so I'm going to mark where it's at the end of the curve, and it's going to tell me how much vacuum advance I have, and then the readings when it starts and when it ends is going to tell me what the curve is. Now that's going to be adjusted again with that Allen wrench, but first I'll show you how to check for it. Same thing with the timing light, but instead of rotating the distributor, we're using the vacuum pump. So I just started seeing it. You might have noticed it rev up, and that's at about 10 inches of vacuum. So now I'm going to see where it maxes out and see what that's at. So 10 inches of vacuum is okay as far as an engagement point goes, but I think 8 degrees would definitely be better. Now, here's another example. I gotta be careful with these things because I boogered up that hose a little bit. I need to take that off at some point, but we'll see. Anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and pop this off and back it out, because right now it's tightened as far as it can go. I just wanted to max it out at one point. So I got the Vaccume Advance curve about where I want it, and now I basically just need to set the mechanical advance, which is a little more hands-on. It is what it sounds like, it's mechanical, so it's a little more than just turning a screw if I do need to make an adjustment, and I have to kind of sort of have 2 sets of eyes, or at least to make it easier. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set the camera up in the cab, and I'm going to have you looking at the tachometer, and I'm going to push the little throttle blades and rev it up, and then I need you guys to tell me what the RPM's at. I'm shooting for around 2,600. So based on that video and me using the timing light to, check how much it advanced and when it stopped advancing, and when it started, I suppose, it's basically all in at 28. So there's not really much of a curve, it just kind of all in at 28. So that's fine, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna check the advance weights and everything and see if there's something maybe restricting it that's causing it to not have a smooth flow of motion. Might even possibly stretch the springs a little bit. Now, if you're a beginner to this kind of stuff, I wouldn't recommend doing that. I've tinkered with a lot of different things. I kind of know when a spring's gonna break. I also do have a forge so I can reheat treat things, and I also have spare springs. So all those things combined make me pretty confident in stretching those springs a little bit myself to get a little bit less resistance. But proceed with caution, and I'm not responsible if you mess up your springs and are stuck until you can get a new set shipped. So they have things called recurve kits that you can get for most distributors, and that's what I would recommend. This is just a basic Chevy HEI setup. Alright, so I got this thing opened up here, and as you can see, the rotor will be attached to this piece, and how it's got a little bit of playroom here. You can imagine when these weights start spinning real fast, they're going to start getting centrifugal force, and that's going to want to start moving that rotor. Now, these springs and weights are basically what determine when that's going to engage, and the rate at which it's going to engage and all that. But you can adjust that by buying a new recurve kit, or an alternative to spending money on parts is you can either weld the weights to the outside of these, and by weights I mean maybe like nuts or bolts, probably a nut because that won't get in the way of anything else, and then you can also stretch these springs, or possibly replace them with like a pen spring or something, some lighter spring than that's what's on there. So those are a couple of alternatives to spending money, but you can also do a recurve kit. That's the safest bet if this is your first time trying something like this. So here's a spring stretching tip if you are new to this and you didn't take my previous advice. Here's some more advice you can ignore. I would recommend not focusing on the actual size of the spring itself, but just the gaps between the springs. And I would only grab it by these loops. And see how now we have a couple of gaps in there, whereas before we didn't? That's just going to reduce the tension on this so that it kicks in a little bit earlier with that advance, and that's going to help us out a lot with driving. With all that taken care of, it's time for a test drive. Check the throttle response here. Not bad. It feels a little more tappy than before with more advanced timing. So thing here is I got a total of about 53 degrees timing when I'm at light cruise, which is going to be when the mechanical and the Vaccume Advance are both at their highest. Now, what I was listening for there is spark knock. That's the biggest danger here. So there's really no right answer to your timing. It's just about when your engine starts to knock. Your engine essentially will communicate with you, not literally, but it'll tell you with spark knock whether or not you have too much advance. Coming up this hill here, it's not too bad. I'm hanging out at about 10 inches of vacuum just above, so that's kind of when the curve starts, but I am at 2,000 RPM, so that's a little lower. It was like 21. It's about when the mechanical should be kicking in a little bit. Vacuum's looking great. Less throttle input to get up these hills for sure. Super into some of the details, like the ported versus manifold vacuum, because I feel like there's other videos out there that'll do a better job. This is hopefully just a beginner's guide to setting up your timing for an HEI distributor. I hope this did give you guys some sort of a head start, or an idea of where to go or how to do this. I hope it did help out and maybe fix any issue you might have ran into if you're sitting there trying to work on it right now. If it did, please consider liking and subscribing. I do videos like this pretty frequently. This is kind of sort of part of a series of me modifying my vans. This is just kind of the probably the last video in this little series about the van truck, I guess, at least for now. But if you do enjoy it and this did help you out, please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps out the channel. Other than that, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. God bless.